in a much better way. Awesome. So let's get stuck in. And thank you again to everyone who has joined today or continues to join today. Should be like really interesting discussion. Some housekeeping just before we do jump into chatting to Dave. You should all be on auto mute, I think, if I've set this up properly. If you do have a question or want to add to the discussion, we can unmute, but just feel free to put something in chat and I can come to you and pass you the mic. We're super happy to like pause the discussion and bring others into the conversation along the way. So please feel free to add that in chat and we'll keep an eye on chat there. Again, if you have some performance challenges that you want to like share that are top of mind, like do that. We can dive into those as well. And like this is a really, really huge topic, clearly, because plenty of people wanted to join today and come and listen. So like within that, well, I probably find this is probably like one of the top 3 challenges that we speak to people teams about on any given day. And like within that, we're seeing more and more people teams wanting help on how we design performance measurement that actually works for different functions and the differences between sales and marketing versus, engineering and product, for example. And so I am super pleased to be joined today by the awesome Dave Garcia, who's CEO and founder of Pensero, and an ex-CTO and tech leader at some amazing companies. He's going to share some of those with you in a minute. But hoping this is going to help shed some light on how we can actually measure performance more effectively in engineering and product, both through Dave's experience learning as a tech and engineering leader, but now as a CEO and founder of Pensero. So Dave, I'm going to come to you. Perhaps you could just give everyone a little bit of an intro to who you are, background, and what you're up to.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the intro. Super glad to be here. I'm Dave, born and raised in Barcelona. Spent most of my career in European companies, British companies, and some American companies. I've been an executive in the tech space for the last 20 years. This is my first experience as a founder, but I've been in companies, different like industries. I've been in travel a lot. I've been in Skyscanner, Trollberg. I've been also in fintech, a couple of them. I work at Square a couple of times. And now it's my first time in the people management space when it comes to tech. And I love to share my experience, that what brought me until this point that we are today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Really, really awesome to have you here again. And I think like nice place for us to just start this conversation is to maybe touch on why measuring performance in engineering and maybe product is different to say sales. I know you've got some views on this. I know probably people recognize that there is a difference, but maybe not fully comfortable with where that difference lies. So talk to me from like a CTO standpoint. Why is it not the same? And where are some of the key differences for you that you've seen?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? So when it comes to measuring performance, when you go to sales or something that is operational, you always have a way of measuring a benchmark, right? So what is your quota? How many business did you bring in? When you go to engineering, product design, let's say, those are creative functions, right? So you go usually from 0 to 1, you are building something. And then in this building, there are many big questions. How complex was this thing to build? What was the actual impact that this thing generated? Were we like efficient when we were building that, right? So those different dimensions are making the problem that we are tackling today about how to measure performance is making it super complex. Apart from that, is that we are talking about technology, right? So you need to have the niche knowledge about the technology you are talking to. So meaning that if you have, let's say, a manager that is dealing with front end, with back end, with mobile, with DevOps, that person, in order to be able to efficiently assess what was the delivery in the performance, that person needs to know a lot. So it needs to be a jack of all trades, and that's super complex usually, right? So it's summarizing is hard to measure because it's hard to have a benchmark. It's a creative function that has many complexities, and usually people that are building and people that are deciding what to build, let's say product or business versus technology, are talking different languages, right? So I'm talking about business needs, KPIs, things that customers are waiting for, And then probably my engineering team is talking about technical constraints. What is the cost of that? What is the efficiency? What is the back rate? What is the impact in our architecture, etc. So we are usually talking about different things and bringing the conversation to this common place where we talk about the same things and we have a way of measuring success in the same way is the complex part, right?
And if you, from your experience before becoming founder, have you found in your previous companies that the idea of performance measurement has maybe been a bit too sort of blanket and can like in terms of like, okay, we can apply the same way of measuring performance to sales as to you and your engineering team, and like from a CTO perspective, how did you handle that conversation?
It's tough because the first thing is like when you say I want to start measuring, people start getting worried, like whoa, what is going on here, right? So like, you don't trust me? No, yeah, I trust you. You don't understand what I'm doing. Maybe. So let's find a way of defining what is good and what is bad, right? So there is a lot of fear around that, which is okay because sometimes in the past people were measured the wrong way. So there is a lot of reluctancy about being measured. But I think maybe jumping to the next thing, if you define rules of the game, which is how people are going to be measured in a way that they are well known and understood, then you change completely the narrative, right? So if instead of me that I really don't understand what you're doing, scoring you, if we define a shared set of goals that can be measured and that can be agreed on, then this thing changes completely the conversation. It goes from it's me that I don't understand what you're doing, trying to tell you what to do and trying to control you in deciding about your career path, to okay, let's work together because I know a part of the problem, which is how this thing affects business, how this thing affects my ability to grow the company. You understand the nitty-gritty and you understand the complexities that are behind building that. Let's work together, no? But in order to do that, you need to have this shared set of beliefs, which is, we will talk about these artifacts later, and this shared vocabulary and this agreed and measurable way of deciding what is success and what is failure, right?
That's like, yeah, perfect. That tees up what I was going to ask you, which is like, this is maybe very opinionated, so feel free to share your opinion, but like, what does a high performing engineer look like to you? Because I think it's a lot easier in some companies, for example, to say, right, we know what a high performing salesperson looks like. I don't think, and maybe I'm generalizing, but I think a lot of people teams in particular, and other people outside of people teams, might look at engineering and find it a lot harder to actually pinpoint what a good engineer looks like and how do we know that they're high performing. So as a CTO, as someone who's very experienced, what sort of competencies, signs, signals do you look for in an engineer to suggest that they are high performing?
Right. That's probably a pretty tricky question. So let me go back to 25 years ago when I was at uni starting, right? So they teach you perfection, right? So you need to have an algorithm that is optimal, that is elegant, that is beautiful. That's not reality. So reality needs to be efficient, but not in the way they taught you, right? It needs to be cost efficient, meaning that I need to solve the problem the best way possible in the cheapest and most efficient way, right? This is what our company is. And then going from A to B is our journey as engineers, right? So you get junior engineers that are thriving for perfection. They want to do something beautiful. And then you get the most senior engineers that are the duct tape people that just want things to work, right? If it works, don't touch it. Let's not make over designs on that, no? So to me, the good engineer is the engineer that understands the context, which means what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the budget that you have for that? And what happens if I do A or B? So it's a person that is more a problem solver than a coding person, right? It's not I'm giving you specs and then you execute on these specs. This thing is getting less and less important with code agents. Coding is becoming a commodity. Thinking is not. So these problem-solving skills and really understanding everything is going to become key. It was key before. So my best engineers during my career were the people that understood the problem at high level, that I can coordinate at higher level, and then make it happen. And I know they make it happen in quality, in budget, and in time. And this understanding these 3 dimensions to me is the key part of being a good engineer. Better than, oh, my code is fantastic. Okay, your code saved me $300 and cost me $3,000. So it's not optimal. But it's coming from this place where we were educated of thinking about the abstract, thinking about the ideal, and that's not the real world, right? Especially in most of us that we are working in small companies, we need to have things built for yesterday. We are competing with people that are bigger, better funded than we are. So we need to be smarter there, right? And to be quick and nimble and make things work. This mentality is the one that, in my opinion, everything I'm going to say, by the way, it's my opinion, doesn't mean it's the truth. Absolutely not. But it's what worked for me. In my opinion, in my companies, in my teams, the best people is the people who understood the context and who understood what is the best decision, all things considered, rather than this is the best. The best is never an answer, right? It's the best in what context, right? And understanding that, having the maturity to understand that, is what differentiates from engineers and like superstars, right?
And do you think, and this is maybe historical as well, but is there a disconnect between, I'm going to focus on people team because that's the world that I'm in, but like also other teams, is there a disconnect there in terms of, you mentioned like the reality versus like the ideal. Is there a disconnect there in terms of other teams looking at engineering, for example, and actually not fully understanding what good looks like from a day-to-day perspective?
Yeah, of course. It's like the eternal joke that we have at engineering is the refactor, right? So every now and then someone comes from the team and is like, we need to refactor that. It's impossible. It's legacy, right? Okay, what does this mean? If you are not able to translate this thing to something people can understand, so it means that we are going slower because we need to fix defects. It means that customers are going to be unhappy because if we are not able to translate from this is legacy to something people can understand, there is this disconnection, right? And this is frustration on both sides, because probably refactor is the right thing to do. But if you are not able to frame it in a way that other people can understand that, then it's a lost battle. So yes, 100%. So our inability to properly express this thing in ways people can understand, that is also coming from the complexity of the business. I need to make it simple, a decision that maybe has 20 different layers, that I need to make it in a way that people can understand. But that's the beauty, right? If you are able to understand the complexity and make it simple, then you really understand the problem, right? So this is where good engineers are. Good engineers understand the problem, decomposes this thing and simplifies to a way that I can tell it to you, yeah, it makes sense. That's the right thing to do, right? But sometimes we don't give people space to do that. And sometimes they don't know. They don't know because they don't understand business. We've been taught about engineering. So in my case, I'm an anomaly. I also study business, so I understand. I got both sides. But most people, they are pure engineers and they understand good and bad, and they don't understand this gray area that is in the middle. That is where, in my opinion, where the beauty stands.
Yeah, there's like I was going to ask you a little bit about how it's not just all on the people team, but how the people team and the engineering team can try and bridge that gap. And there's like the common language thing that you talked a little bit about there, but where I tend to come in often when I get pulled into this stuff is the performance framework, or how we measure performance here, has already been designed to be this sort of blanket approach for the entire organization. And results is normally a pillar of that. And that doesn't always translate well to engineering. So you've already got this sort of thing that's been pre-designed, mapped out to an HRIS, and cycle's been built, but not necessarily with a full understanding of how it might work for different teams. So that's like, interesting to hear from your side. I'd love to know a little bit about what you found has worked. When you think about when performance has been measured really, really well in your team, like talk to me a little bit about some of the things that do work from your experience that maybe people start thinking about.
When you are small, everything works because, right, you can talk to people all the time. When you start getting some size, 10 people, 10 engineers, 20 engineers, then you need to set the rules of the game, which is the competency framework we've been talking unofficially until now, which is what are the rules of the game, right? What is a goal? How do you win? How do you lose? How are you going to be measured? That's probably the most important part. And that's something that needs to be adapted to your company, right? So if you have a company with 20 people, it's not the same as 2,000 people. Not everyone is Google, so you don't need 8 levels. Maybe you need 3, or maybe you need 10. It's up to you. But that's the first pillar that we should be considering. Every company where I was successful, we had a clear set of rules of the game that was used to measure people's success, right? So people knew how they were going to be evaluated, and what were the different competencies that they needed to work on, right? Because we are not good on everything or bad on everything. So it's good to define these different layers, different dimensions, so like communications, coding, collaboration, leadership, blah, blah, you name it. And then how do you score? Because you don't improve what you don't measure, right? So it's important to set this framework first. The second one that I mentioned it before, but I'm going to repeat it. It needs to be adapted to your company. So if in your company collaboration is important, it needs to be there and it needs to be prominent, right? If it's not, don't put it there because it sounds fine. So use the same, be consistent. So it needs to be a reflex of the real values from your company. And not every company is the same. There are not 2 companies that are the same. So spend some time adapting that. The third one, it needs to be fair as possible. We are talking about humans. You know how it is. Humans, we are not exact. It's not easy to measure what is the impact of feature A versus feature B versus refactor D. So it's not easy, but try to do your best. Try to get as many data points as possible. Talk to people, check the deliverables, check how this thing affected the KPIs, and then put all these data points within the boxes, right? So if you talk to the marketing department and you help them release this new feature that goes way beyond your expectations, make sure your leadership or your communication skill gets like bumped and recognized. The same thing with everything that is there. And this is probably the part what is the heaviest part, which is gathering data. And this is the part that can make a big difference, right? Because if you just get impressions, then we engineers, we are very cynical. Yeah, smart people tend to be cynical. So if you go to them with solid data, you can discuss about facts. If you discuss about feelings, they are going to get defensive because we are like this, and we are going to say, no, you don't get that. End of the conversation, disconnection. While if you go with pretty nurture set of data that you can agree or disagree about, then the conversation gets completely different because you made the work, not in your case. And this thing is something that managers can help you big time on that because they understand the technology that they are dealing with and they understand the business impact, so they should be this link. If you go with a competency framework, what you did and how this thing aligns, it's much easier. Then, if I may, the last part of that is the body of work. People have responsibility on their careers, so they need to be working on what they do. So they need to have this log, like I did that and I generated that impact, and this almost weekly like log of things they did, because I don't know you guys, but I tend to forget what I did the week before. So it's very important that I write down everything and why this thing is important, like this, like 30 minutes reflection every week, because this thing will nurture the previous 2 that we did. And with all these pieces, I think you are good.
There's 2 things there I want to dive into that are slightly separate, sort of, but very important pieces of the puzzle for me. But on the competency framework thing, I'd love to get your advice on this, because and your thoughts. Whose job is it to build that, competency framework? Because maybe I see one side of the argument more than the other. I spend more time with people teams than the other, but I see so many people teams who are stuck in this like slow cycle. We don't know where to start. It's taking us forever. We need to build a competency framework for engineering. We're trying to do it ourselves without understanding what that is. And we try and encourage them to, this should be work that managers and engineering, in my view, should be doing together with the people team. But too often people teams either try and do it themselves or are forced to. What's your view on that? How have you sort of handled that? And how might a people team navigate that if they are getting some pushback?
Yeah, that's an easy one because I failed in every possible way. So I know all the ways of how not to do that. So I try to do it either engineering alone or either people alone. I think the time where it worked the best is when I work myself with my chief people officer and we build it together. And it was something that we both had a skin in the game, right? So we both need to have an upside there. So it needs to be in our OKRs, and we need to make sure this thing is understood for both of us, that is key for us. For people to be able to communicate to the rest of the org, and for me to be able to manage my org inside, right? So I think, in my opinion and in my experience, it needs to be a 50-50. If it's coming from people, people are going to say, nah, it's not coming from someone that understands my trade. Okay, if it's coming just from engineering, we're probably going to miss everything, and it's going to be focusing on the wrong things. I think the best is when it comes from both parts, because you get the whole picture.
And the other thing that you touched on there, which gets me into the sort of mode of how we measure performance outside of cycles, like traditional cycles, and we could open up a can of worms there, and I'm sure we will go there in a minute. But you talked a little bit about like reflections and noting stuff down. Like, it took me to a place where I started thinking about like one-to-ones, which for me are like a absolute foundation of getting any sort of level of performance measurement right. So, but again, these are like basic things that companies should be getting right, that individuals in companies and managers should be getting right, but they just don't happen. So you can spend all the money you want on fancy tools, building like amazing frameworks, like getting the cycles right, getting the questions right in how you measure, etc. But if there's nothing happening like consistently day to day, and if those one-to-ones aren't happening or not happening in the right way, then it all falls apart. So I meet a lot of people teams who struggle to build like the right type of agenda for a one-to-one. I'd love to get some insight from you on maybe some of your favorite agenda points that might like come up within engineering. Like, what sort of stuff are you checking in with your team, like when you're chatting to them, and like why is it important? How does it sort of translate to measuring performance?
Yeah, it's super important, because usually things don't happen in quarters; they happen in weeks, right? So, or in days. So if you want to be able to drive the conversation and to help people when they need it, it needs to happen every week or every 2 weeks tops, no more. The problem is that, I include myself, if you don't have a well-defined process for one-to-ones, you become lazy, and then you talk about the weather, about the football match the day before, and how are you feeling, but super high level, no? And then it's really tough to get any value from there. But you just check, yeah, we have the one-to-one, everything is good, no? So to me, the one-to-one needs to have an agenda. It needs to have several points that you always need to cover, which is, since the last time, did you have any problem? Did you find any blocker? Is there anything I can do to help you? You also need to have career conversations. So like, where do you want to be? And then, since the last time we spoke, did you make any progress towards this goal? No? And last but not least, it needs to be a bit challenging, right? So people usually, at least in my opinion, maybe it's because how I am, but they tend to be a bit like not giving you full disclosure when they have a problem. They give you hints, right? And this is like playing detective. So try to poke a bit the bear to see, is there anything there that is not working well? And then if you find that, use your instinct to do that. No, so it's a mix of let's get a good agenda. Let's have blockers, the typical operational thing that you have. What did you deliver? How are you feeling, etc., etc. Career conversations, and then let's try to find if there is anything that is not an unwritten thing, right? That you can feel. That this usually doesn't happen. It happens 1 out of 50 times, but when it happens, you better be listening. And to be able to do that, you need to have education. Not most people that are managers are not being properly trained to be managers, right? So it's that you learn the job and then read this book, bye, no? So I think having a proper education, and then people department can help big time here, how to have hard conversations, because sometimes you're not performing. How can I tell you are not performing without killing your motivation, right? That's an art, but that's an art that can be trained, right? How can I get more from you? So maybe you are doing great, but you can be killing it. How can I give you this feedback, right? So I feel like I'm going in circles, but I'm going somewhere. Trust me. It's like, let's get an agenda. Let's get people trained. Let's make sure the output of this meeting is something that is well structured. It's not like 3 lines, but you need to fill at least that many boxes out of that. And then in the next month, you need to fill all the boxes to make sure you cover all people. And then make sure people are heard. So they need to have a safe space, right? And that depends a lot on the company. So like they should be able to tell you anything. If their peers are not treating them well, they need to be able to tell you that in a safe space. So this means that you need to have this, let's say, secret between manager and employee, and also you as managers need to have a way of escalating problems to HR without compromising the person. I don't know. I covered like 20 topics. I don't know if it was clear enough.
No, that's awesome. It's again, it sounds boring to a lot of people or like foundational, but we spend so much time on this topic day to day, and when you dig down deep and you get to the topic of one-to-ones, you find out that actually like we don't have a consistent agenda that we use. 50% of one-to-ones don't even happen. Managers cancel them or don't show up, or they turn into these. That is like, for me, like if you're not doing that well, you can't do the rest. And that's why I wanted to spend a bit of time there, because I think it's useful. Before we move on from that, very, very quickly, we talked earlier a little bit about like what a high-performing engineer looks like. What's some of the sort of data points or signals you're looking for day to day to maybe suggest that someone's not performing? I know that, so if you think like underperforming engineers, I know you as a company have to probably define what underperformance looks like, but is it, quality, speed of work, whatever that might be, is that explicitly tied to things like company values and what we care deeply about here contextually, or is there like universal data points you think CTOs look at?
That's a good point. I don't think it's universal, because if you work in big corporations is one thing. If you work in a small startup is another thing. But simplifying to the max is what you deliver and what you help deliver, right? So like it's a mix of your delivery, and delivery is what you put in front of people minus the defects. So I may be putting a lot of things in front of customers. If this thing is broken, it's generating more damage than good. And at the same time, and especially the most senior people in companies, when it comes to engineering, they are not doers, they are enablers, right? So like you need to have a way of measuring all this glue work that happens behind. And this is not politics, don't get me wrong. This is not, I'm going and having coffee with people. I'm helping people do their work. I'm reviewing their work. I'm helping them do better designs. I'm helping them make the right decisions. So you need to combine both. So if you only focus on the hard deliveries, you might be losing a big percentage of the people that are making the company work. If you don't focus on the hard deliverers, you may be losing these people that are heroes of the company, that are the ones that are keeping the lights on, right? So it's a mix of both of them. And then what is the weight on one or the other depends on the stage of your company, the business of your company, and also your values, as we said before, right? If one of your values is collaboration, you maybe need to stress more on that part. While if your value is growth, then it's probably about delivering a lot of features with high quality, regardless of helping the person that is next to you. That's there are many different companies. It needs to be there, but it's a balance on those two.
Yeah, again, we touched on this. We've touched on this before as a conversation piece. Is like, I feel like in engineering and it may be other functions as well, but there's more opportunity or potential for you to be pulled in certain directions to help other people with delivery, versus maybe sales, where you've got your own target, you go and do your own thing. Someone in chat mentioned it earlier, like maybe there's more of a team environment with engineering, and you're operating as a group rather than as an individual. And it can be harder to then tie it to tangible goals. I had a conversation very recently with someone on this topic in their business, and long story short, engineering were consistently rating a lot of their engineers as exceeding expectations, but OKRs were being like quite badly missed, and the product roadmap was behind where it needed to be. So you've got this one sort of piece there that's anchoring like, okay, we're not where we need to be, but the engineering team are like being rated higher than anyone else. Is there the potential there actually with some of these individuals could be performing, but it's just not specifically to do with the roadmap and the business goals?
Yeah, no, 100%. This is why it's important to not just drive engineering departments with purely engineering metrics or surveys. You need to have a way of measuring the real impact in business, and this can be OKRs, can be high-level goals, can be KPIs. Our job needs to be translated to something real. Otherwise, we are living a fiction, right? And then everything is good because we don't have a benchmark. We don't have a way of measuring. How do you measure success, right? So success is, I'm making the company successful, yes or no. And then this thing can be done in many different ways. What is the optimal? It will depend on how the engineering team organizes. But if you are feeling that you are killing it, but your OKRs are not being delivered, you are not. So you are living a fiction, right? So this is why it's important not only to have a competency framework, but a part of that needs to be what is the business impact. Because in the end, if the business is not working, everything else is irrelevant, right? So we are a supporting function that is building something that is generating business. We are not a goal. We are a mean to get business. That's something I always told my engineers. If I can go to the internet and download our software, we will not be building it. If I can buy it, we will be buying it. We are building it because it cannot be bought, it cannot be downloaded. Let's make it the best way possible, right? And this thing needs to affect. So if we are not delivering, let's solve the problem. Let's communicate with the rest of the company and let's explain why we are not delivering. Maybe it's because we have something underlying that is not being solved. Let's address the elephant in the room, right? So, but it's very important not to only have your own, let's say, engineering metrics that are disconnected from business. That's something I really stress. You need to be connected to business. And then if business works, you explain why it works. If it doesn't, you can explain why you are not able to hit your OKRs and how are you going to fix it. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, no one knows, it's a black box. So let's do some crazy exercises and let's arrive to the conclusion that it's impossible. Nothing happens,
But people teams have this problem, the exact same problem in their own way. Like, again, countless conversations with people teams who really struggle to translate their work and show how it connects to business goals and like how it's impacting the business. It's a constant conversation between like people teams and exec teams, but it's also happening clearly between engineering and other teams as well. And that's just a common language communication thing. I wanted to ask you, and we will get onto Pensero and like the inner workings of that soon, because I think that's really important work that you're doing there to bring this to life. But you touched on like some of the sort of tangible day-to-day stuff that engineers could be doing that maybe aren't being tracked or measured. And is that long story short why you set up Pensero, like so that there's a way now of actually being able to track and measure the work that engineers are doing day to day without bringing gut feel into it?
Yeah, no, totally. It's like I always found that being able to really understand what is going on in the company, to when the company starts growing more than a handful of people, is really tough because you start adding layers of management. And then I had this thing where I talked to my reports and they told me something and it sounded weird. So I start digging and talk to the report of the report and then to the report of the report. And then I talked to the person that was actually solving the problem and it had nothing to do. Like, wow, that person told me something that it didn't match my understanding. So I went to the source and it's like, wow, there is a lot of noise. The ratio of signal noise is huge, no? And this means that the decisions you are making are never optimal, right? So now what we built is we want to use technology to be able to solve this problem, like problem of making sense of everything that is happening in your org to the point that everyone can agree about hard evidences without having to spend a lot of time. You can do that manually, but means that you are not doing anything else. It means that your managers are checking every single thing people are producing, your engineers are constantly reporting on what they're doing and why this thing is important. Then you need to calibrate, and then you have something, but you know what? You spend more time preparing the report than actually doing the work. So we wanted to say there is a lot of manual work that machines can do. Let's leave machines do what machines can do good, and then let's humans make the decisions. They do the coaching, do the inspiration, right? Things that machines cannot do, right? So I want to have this, my inspiration to build Pensero is I want to have all the heavy lifting that machines are better doing, done by machines, and giving these distilled, like evidence-based insights to people so they can make the best decisions. And then another beauty of the solution is we don't want this thing to be like top bottom. I want people to see how others see themselves, right? I don't want this to be like a surprise, because performance cycles, as most of you probably know, is like tossing a coin, right? It's like most of my engineers always came saying, I don't know if you are going to promote me or fire me. It's like a 50-50 thing, right? Because I really don't know. And it's like, okay, no, it's fine. Don't worry, because firing will never be a surprise. But they came with this mindset, right? Because we are living in a constant imposter syndrome, where we really don't know. So we do our best, and we don't know if our best is good or bad or mediocre or outstanding. We need someone else to come, and when this thing comes, is most of the times it's a surprise.
Is that more telling, perhaps, though, of the work that's happening in between those cycles? So, like, again, we won't go back into one-to-ones, but like everything that happens in between those cycles, feedback, one-to-ones, regularity of this. I like made a note about earlier about curious to understand more about your thoughts on like continuous performance, which is like obviously a big topic for a lot of people at the moment, how we move away from annual to or biannual to like monthly cadence, for example. Does that work better for engineers, do you think? Because my gut would almost also tell me, or part of it would tell me, that maybe like the sort of work you're doing you might need more breathing space there to prove or show the impact you're doing over time. But maybe that's not the case. Like, what's your view on that when it comes to engineering and like the continuous nature of how we measure it?
I think it's important, the continuous part, because you might be missing part of the story if you don't do that. Because a lot of things happening. Like, you probably, if you are in a modern software company, you are releasing 20 times a week. You probably generated 20 different impacts into customers. It's really easy to forget, because the moment you solve something, you jump into something else, right? So it's good to have this way of writing down and then sharing it with someone else to give you this way of measuring if that thing was actually impactful in a positive way or not, right? I think it's important to write it down, and then every 3 or 6 months do this retrospective, where you say, okay, in retrospective, all these 36 data points that we had in the last 6 months were relevant. 20, sorry. Because of that, this is the total impact that I generated, but I have all the different pieces that are making my body of work, because otherwise we are humans, right? So we have so much attention. So we tend to focus on either the outliers, exceptionally good or exceptionally bad. And people, we are not linear, right? So we have ups and downs and all these kind of things. So to be able to be fair, you need to have all the data points. You need to have the continuous graph. This is why I think it's important to do that, but also to do the exercise of summarizing, right? The performance is not going to be a million tiny points. It's going to be the picture that this thing draws, but you need to have the points, right? To be able to connect the dots, you need to have the whole thing. So I think it's a mix of both. And then one thing that I missed mentioning before is the calibration, that you cannot be calibrating constantly. And we humans, we have biases, conscious and unconscious biases. We have biases. So we have managers that are tougher, managers that are softer. In the end, to be fair, we need to have the same way of measuring. The bar needs to be consistent, right? So you need to have, apart from this retrospective, you need to have the calibration, where you and me, we talk and we calibrate what good and bad is for us. Because even though having competency framework, you can be surprised on how opinions may diverge, and then we need to agree. Because if you and me, we agree, coming from different places with different data, probably our decision is going to be much better than me just deciding by myself. If that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. And we've had a bunch of questions come into chat, so I'm just going to pause very briefly on our chat, because I want to make sure we cover off a couple of these, and then after that, going to see if we can sort of wrap some of this up with a bit of a sketch out to help folks maybe think about a few things they could take away and start thinking about it in case they're missing anything here. So I'm going to start bottom to top and just sort of scroll back up. But so Sophie has asked a really interesting question, actually, which links a little bit to some of my thoughts on this. But you said struggling with engineering managers in particular, where they need everything to be really black and white. So struggling to use their judgment to measure against goals and performance and then they rely too much on guiding principles that we set as if it's like a really exact science. So have you got any advice on that?
I think maybe I'm mistaken in this particular case, but at least in my experience, it comes from lack of knowing the trade, right? So if you are an engineer, you are probably never studied anything about people. You probably don't even understand people. So we don't understand how people work, how they communicate. We are not being tough to have tough conversations, to read in between the lines. So there is a lot of things that can be tough, right? So I can teach you about how to do these things, and then I can have one-to-ones to calibrate your understanding on that, right? So like it's not something that I'm giving you like this bootcamp and then throw you into the wild and never talk to you again. Probably, at least in the companies where I've been, people function needs to be present there, and then to be calibrating with managers, like what were the challenges you had, what were the questions you want me to help you with, and I can give you some criteria outside of that, right? And that needs to be done also by the engineering leader. So the manager of the manager, they need to understand that, and probably they've been through that before. So they need to have this, they need to be covering that during their one-to-ones, right? So they need to be covering my reports are struggling with that. How can I help them, right? I think it's like sharing and educating ourselves. And there are probably a bunch of professionals out there that are giving really nice courses about that. I think you can never invest enough on making sure your people understand how to deal with people, right? Because we know how to deal with machines. People are completely different sport. So we need to start over again. And sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that we don't know. If I'm a senior engineer that usually knows everything and I transition to be a hybrid or people manager, I'm probably going to be very afraid because I'm going to start over again. I used to be someone who knew everything. Now I don't know anything. So holding hands is going to become really important if we want this to be successful. And they need to understand that people are not machines. It's not black and white, never. People are always gray, and people always tend to behave like people. So there is an adaptation there for managers. They need to understand that sometimes they do something and the result is A, and sometimes they do something and the result is B, something that is happening with AI these days, right? We are going bananas because LLMs, sometimes they tell you one thing and sometimes they tell you another thing. You know what? People are the same. This is not like an exact machine where everything is going to happen the same, no? So like this education is going to be fundamental for them to be successful.
And this is like, again, is where it's hard because I think there's a lot of companies end up trying to apply this, even if it's like a really lightweight traffic light style system of like, doesn't meet, exceed. It's really easy in sales. Like you've got £1 million target. If you hit £1 million, you've met it. If you go over that, you've exceeded it. Like on the results piece, at least, you know, in engineering, it feels like there's possibly harder, or you maybe have to work a little bit harder to come up with those really tangible outcomes of like, okay, we've met this exact thing, or we've exceeded this exact thing, and that's I think maybe possibly where Sophie sort of stuck on as well, which is hard. My gut would be actually maybe we're trying to apply the wrong measures, or have a framework to the wrong team, and is there a redesign there that could be quite a cool fit?
Yeah, but it's a good point. I think it can be done. I did it, but it just takes more time, right? Rather, because you cannot just go and get the dollars that you sold. It's like you get the impact that you did, and you try to calibrate. You get the sample of your top 20 contributions, and then you try to score them, right? So like you did this change in this service. Okay, I go to the competency framework. This is the expectation for an engineer level 3, and you're at level 4. This is not great. Or the other way around. You're engineer level 3, and then you made a change in the architecture that is saving a lot of time for engineers. Wow, that was 2 levels above your pay grade, right? So this means that you are exceeding. So it's about getting the different boxes that you have in the competency framework, getting all your contributions, and then getting the contribution saying this contribution goes into this bucket, in this bucket, in this bucket, and then summarizing, right? If most of your time went to a bucket that is above you for all consistently, then you are above. If you went 2 levels above, then you need to go for promotion. If you stayed in the same, you meet expectation. If you are a principal engineer that are doing tiny pull requests and you're not helping anyone, you score below your grade, then you go down. So my exercise was always getting this Excel file. So before I was using Excel files, and I had the matrix that was competency levels, and then I was sampling my reports contributions and then putting them in boxes and then doing the summary. And that's a pretty solid way of doing that versus what I think or versus like opinions. Because then if you find any anomalies, then you can go to the person and say, why all your contributions were just simple pull requests that were not changing architecture if you're a principal engineer? It's because that thing happened. Okay, I didn't know that. So you can start doing making the right questions to people. But I think it can be done. It's just getting, it's not so evident. So you need to get proxies and then compare and then translate. But if you get this competency framework, everything inside their box and then summarizing, I think you can have a really, really strong view on what people are actually contributing.
And what about like self-setting goals or targets or whatever you might want to call it in a particular business? So Raheem has asked just before this as well. So mentioned that there's like some level of employees setting their own goals and maybe the business setting some as well. But have you had any experience or exposure to like letting your engineering teams previously set their own goals? Like, is that how's that gone?
Yeah, it needs to be a honest conversation so that you can set your goals within the expectations inside the competency framework. Like if you are a software engineer level, let's say 2, you cannot be deciding the company's architectural policy, for example. So you need to be realistic within the scope of where you are and the future states where you can be. You can decide what you want to do because then you're going to be more motivated. You're going to do it better, and then it's going to be better for everyone, right? But it needs to be aligned with your company values and with the expectations that you have for that person and with the career path. Like I always had the joke, and that was an extreme joke. If you want to learn how to play the guitar, that's fantastic, but that's not going to happen in my team. But if you want to understand how systems better work, this will happen. And maybe someone else wants to understand how front-end design works. And that's also compatible with what I want because there are different tracks. But those tracks, they need to be, you can choose your own path, but it needs to be within the charted territory, right?
Yeah, we had it's a very different environment, but in my last company, we set about letting people pick their own goals effectively that were going to determine their promotion, pay rises, performance, etc. Full trust on them. We still like had an overview of like what goals are being set, and we'd still push back a little bit if we felt something was too easy or too hard. So we still kept within that guardrails, but it all had to come from those folks. And the reason being, we had an environment where everyone was in completely different client teams. Someone asked earlier about advice on like consultancy context. I think it was Faye. I don't know if this track's always helpful at all, but when you've got people in very different client environments, we sort of had a view that they and only they will really know exactly what hard looks like for them and what challenging is for them. And we can't really decide that. So we need to sort of set a broad framework, but actually when it comes to goals and creating something really black and white and tangible, they're the best person to do that. And we put full trust on them, which you won't have in every business, but it's an interesting idea to lean into if anyone feels like they've got that ability to let people self-set some goals, but still have some ability to sort of sign them off from above. Could be an interesting thing to lean into. From a timing perspective, we'll come back to a couple of other questions that maybe that are in chat. If you want to ask anything or throw anything out there or just add, do that now, and we'll come back to chat in a moment. I just want to see if like maybe just wrap this up a little bit in the next couple of minutes, Dave, and then love to hear a bit more about Pensero as well. So let's sort of like sketch it out for people a little bit. So like if we're ignoring tools for a second, which gives a lot of people like a much more level playing field, as it were, an opportunity. Like, what do we need in place? What things should people be thinking about? We talked a lot about competency frameworks as a starting point, haven't we? So like understanding what a good engineer looks like here. I won't ask the question to the folks watching, but it would be interesting to understand how many people can answer that in their business, because a lot of teams I meet haven't necessarily got proper like clarity over what a good engineer is here. And I think that's like a really interesting opportunity to spend some time with engineering as a team to actually like, understand like, hey, what does that look like for us contextually and what are we measuring? So getting those measures which we talked about. Values and behaviors is something that we haven't touched on loads, but I think you maybe have mentioned it in respect of like bringing that into competency framework as well.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's super important, that part, because if people are productive but are going against your values, it's totally worthless, right? So this is what defines what is good and bad for your company. So they need to be consistent. They need to be totally aligned. So your competency framework and your values, they need to talk the same language.
And how about like this sort of muddles in a little bit with behaviors and how we work, but what about sort of culture and ways of working as a team? But again, like, what part does that play in terms of everyone's got one, everyone's got a culture, everyone's got their ways of working, but we find that not everyone has really surfaced that properly and fully understands this is our identity and how we communicate, how we do things here as a team. And that comes into performance measurement for me, because if how you're communicating and collaborating, or working with the rest of your team, and we've touched on this idea that maybe engineering is a bit more of a team focused environment from a performance perspective. Like where do you place that in the sort of list of things that need to be surfaced and understood?
Yeah, to me, the way I always communicated values is the tool that I draw, that I used to draw the lines where I hire, I fire, and I promote people. So those are the boundaries of the world, right? Within that is performance, right? But the values are like the things that are non-negotiable. And it's like, if you live by the values, you will probably get promoted if you're performant. If you leave the values, you are not part of this company. You are not a good part, because otherwise the values are BS, right? So like if one of my values is we need to collaborate, and then you are like a lone wolf that do your own thing, and I still promote you, what are the rest of the people going to think? And then those are worthless, and then my company is worse because of that, right? So those are, let's say, my values are, let's say, the canvas that I used to write. If something is outside of that, I don't draw there. And then within the limits of my values is where the performance lives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that complete sense. Awesome. And then so we've touched on goals a lot as well. I think very hard to give a clear answer on this for folks because it's so contextual, but we've had this sort of like toing and froing of like goals being as tangible as possible, but also there's this gray area between black and white. And I think again it comes back to trying to like really understand how we measure like what a good engineer is here. Some companies might lean into speed, some people might lean into quality. Ties back to that values piece again. So again, that's like a co-created effort, I think, from that point of view. Rhythms is another point we've covered today, which I think is really important for that sort of checklist of things that we need to like make sure we are thinking about. So we're talking like how often do we run these cycles? I have to admit, I sort of had this sort of feeling in my gut that maybe too continuous might not work for engineering, because you might need that time and that space to like prove impact and what we're doing, but you feel the opposite. I'll take your lead on that because you're the expert and I'm not the engineer. But yeah, it makes sense everything you said earlier about how quickly you are actually working day to day and the amount of work that you are shipping and iterating on.
Yeah, not totally. It needs to be like data collection and calibration is to happen continuously, and then the retrospective can happen twice a year up to that, because it needs to be really aligned with your OKRs, and your OKRs, they usually happen every quarter or every 2 quarters. So I think there needs to be this cadency where you overlap business impact with your delivery, and this is the moment you take the snapshot and then you do the other thing. So I think summarizing, you capture continuously, and then you put in perspective with the business goals on the OKRs 2-4 times a year. You cannot do this thing every week, as you said, it's 100%. So you're going to be measuring impact even in tiny companies every week. But you can be capturing data and calibrating it. So when the moment to take the snapshot comes, you have everything already set.
Love it. And I guess like final note as well, we touched on Pensero a little bit earlier on, and what you're measuring, how you're measuring it, why you built it. You have built something very, very cool there, very, very different that I've never seen before, and it's very, very tailored, very specifically to solving this problem of performance in engineering teams. So where can folks find out more about you, about Pensero? How can they connect with you as well?
Yeah, they can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm writing about the topic every week. I try to build like meaningful pieces. I try not to post stupidities, only things that are adding value to people. I'm trying to build a community around that. And about the product, they can just go there and open an account and then use it. So we want people to be loving the product. We don't want to push this thing on anyone. So it's open, it's free for up to 10 people. And then if they love it, we can talk about how can we deploy it in bigger setups. But we are just trying to solve a problem that we believe is very real, and we try to make this problem at least not go away, but to be reduced, no? To let humans do what humans do best. That is not summarizing data, but is helping people be better.
Amazing. On the topic of summarizing, folks, I will be pulling together like a big one-pager with loads of like takeaway bits and bobs, resources. Dave's got a few things lined up that we think we can add to this as well. So keep an eye out for that. I will email it around in the coming days. We have hit time. I didn't realize that until a minute or so ago. And I know there were other questions, so apologies if we didn't get round to your question. We will follow up. But thank you so much to everyone for joining, for listening, for joining in. Thank you, Dave, for joining as well. Awesome to chat, learned lots, and we will see you all next time, hopefully.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks, folks. See you later. Bye.